皆さんこんにちは。リオナです。Let's study te form together. We change the dictionary form of a verb to te form when describing an action in progress, making a request of someone, etc. Now, let's see how to change the dictionary form to te form. First, let's change the dictionary form of the verb to mas form. If you'd like to know how to change the dictionary form of the verb to mas form, please watch this video. After completing the next step, we can create te form. The next step differs for each group of verbs. Now, I will explain them one by one. First, Group 1. In Group 1 verbs, the character before a mas is important. If the character before mas is ki, change ki to ite and remove mas, please. If the character before mas is gi, change gi to ide and remove mas, please. If the character before mas is I, chi, or ri, change I, chi, ri to te and remove mas, please. If the character before mas is ni, bi, or mi, change ni, bi, mi to nde and remove mas, please. If the character before mas is shi, change shi to shite and remove mas, please. For example, in the case of kikimasu, which is the mas form of listen, kiku, the character before mas is ki. So, by changing this ki to ite and removing mas, we can make it te form. And in the case of oyogimasu, which is the mas form of swim, oyogu, the character before mas is gi. So, by changing this gi to ide and removing mas, we can make it te form. And in the case of araimasu, which is the mas form of wash, arau, the character before mas is I. So by changing this I to ute and removing mas, we can make it te form. And in the case of tachimasu, which is the mas form of stand, tatsu, the character before mas is chi. So, by changing this chi to te and removing mas, we can make it te form. In the case of tsukurimasu, which is mas form of make, tsukuru, the character before mas is ri. So, by changing this ri to te and removing mas, we can make it te form. In the case of 死にます which is must form of die, 死ぬ the character before must is に So, by changing this に to んで and removing must, we can make it て form. In the case of 呼びます which is the must form of call, 呼ぶ the character before must is び So, by changing this び to んで and removing must, we can make it て form. And in the case of 読みます which is the must form of read, 読む the character before must is み So, by changing this み to んで and removing must, we can make it て form. And in the case of 押します which is the must form of push, 押す the character before must is し So, by changing this し to して and removing must, we can make it て form. Next is Group 2. In the case of Group 2 verbs, you can make て form by changing must to て. For example, in the case of 開けます which is the must form of open, 開ける it is Group 2 verb, so by changing this must to て we can make it て form. And in the case of 見ます which is must form of watch, look, 見る it is Group 2 verb, so by changing this must to て we can make it て form. Next is Group 3. In the case of Group 3 verbs, you can make て form by changing must to て. For example, in the case of 来ます which is the must form of come, 来る it is Group 3 verb, so by changing this must to て we can make it て form. And in the case of します which is the must form of do, する it is Group 3 verb, so by changing this must to て we can make it て form. Lastly, let's review what we learned so far. Group 1. 聞いてぎで一りてにびみんでしして Group 2 and 3. ますて聞いてぎで一りてにびみんでししてんますてお疲れ様でした。We'll be using this て form in various grammars, so I'd like you to memorize how to do this change. See you again in the next video. Bye bye!